I don't know.
I'd like to call the meeting to order. If we could please stand and say the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. We do have one visitor wishing to speak, and I would like to read our policy on public comment expression. The public comments section is a time set aside for the community to speak directly to the Board of Education. Per policy 1510, each speaker is given 3 minutes. When called, please stand at the podium and state your name and address. Please be respectful in your comments and do not divulge any personal or confidential information. Also, under state and federal privacy laws, we are unable to entertain any comments related to employee personnel information or any topic that may disclose information about specific individuals. On these matters, we ask that you go through the appropriate administrative channels. The board will listen to your remarks, but no action or discussion will take place at this meeting. Therefore, please do not expect us to respond tonight. And I'd like to call Mr. Aaron Mango to the podium.
Thanks.
Welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for the opportunity to address you all. So I'm here because my name's Aaron Mango. I live at 340 Bernhardt Drive. My daughter is Georgia Mango. She's a junior at the high school. She has consistently been a multi-varsity sport athlete and has played athletics all the way up through her 7th and 8th grade season into her current year. She identified an issue at the high school where the varsity girls' locker room has a shower, the varsity boys' locker room has a shower, and in October and then early November, she told me that the girls' shower was unable to be used because it was blocked by equipment and it just didn't seem fair to her. She's a girl who's in a male-dominated world and has had other gender inequality issues that she's raised to me in the past. She's a very strong-willed person, and I've heard her out, and she's decided then whether or not to bring that to the attention of people who could change it, such as the junior varsity girls soccer team primarily playing on grass, when the boys junior varsity soccer team primarily plays on turf. The past 2 years, no mention of the girls hockey team in the high school yearbook. These things gnaw away at her, but this is much different. This is an easy fix that shouldn't have taken so long to get to me having to stand up here. When I told her to raise it to the attention of a senior employee at the school district here, she did. She did that on November 20th. And she identified the issues. There was a washer dryer in the women's varsity shower room, that there was other surplus equipment, and it didn't seem fair to her because the boys had showers that were operable. So she stayed on it. She sent a follow-up email, sent another follow-up email, and by the end of December, she felt she hit a wall, which was upsetting to her, and I told her I would try to help out. I've now hit a wall. I understand there's some limited progress. In fact, it was the high school girls, one of the high school girls' coaches literally dragged football pads out of the shower room and put them in the hallway. And then they made their way into the boys' storage area. But I felt that no progress has been made, despite Georgia bringing this to attention. And this is an easy one. You know, this was something where, you empower and you try to empower your daughters and your sons to make change, positive change. And unfortunately, that didn't happen here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we do have some committee reports. I'd like to ask Mrs. Arrington to report on the policy committee.
And we had a policy meeting on Monday, January 29. A lot of the policies, some were just changing verbiage. We have a policy where now we're going to have a more comprehensive public school building safety program presentation for the board. That's something kind of new. We do all the steps already, but now making it more all in one place and comprehensive. And there are policies on here that we're deleting, and that's something we haven't really seen before, but what that is, these are just policies. They're essentially now just essentially procedures. They're no longer going to be updated, so they're listed as policies that we are going to delete.
Thank you.
And I would just add that some of them are also have been integrated into other policies that have been adopted, as far as the two groups of policies being deleted.
Yep, exactly.
And I also attended our district safety committee meeting, which I can report on. We met on February 1st to review the New York State Workplace Violence Prevention Program. That's recently been updated to include schools, and so this already kind of fell under our district safety committee, and much of the information was already included in our planning, but we felt that we had to meet to make sure we were meeting some guidelines that and some deadlines. So we had some specific timelines in place, with the ultimate timeline having our plan in place by May 3rd, which we plan to meet that deadline. Our committee reviewed and or developed some of the following: New York State guidance and New York State templates, the district draft policy from policy services, a public policy statement draft. We got a lot accomplished. It's more. Risk analysis requirements, a program template, incident report form, and training procedures. So each building will be completing the risk analysis independently as required by the guidance. And then Mr. Bella will be finalizing the policy and policy statement, the program template and the report form, and the training given to the feedback from the committee. And then the required policy will be approved at an upcoming policy committee, and then the board meeting after that. And then after that, we will review everything once again in our next safety committee meeting, which will be in the spring. Any other committee reports? No? Well, thank you. I would like to ask Superintendent Pinella to introduce new business for us.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, our superintendent's report.
Right, yes. So in the superintendent's report, we have a budget update from Mrs. Wazinski. So welcome, Mrs. Wazinski, and happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
There's a gift.
Yeah, we have to talk about how you're being treated here. But the budget update is an important one tonight, because we did get some updated information from the executive proposal from the governor, as well as TRS rates and some more information relative to our tax cap calculation. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So as Superintendent Pinella stated, tonight we are going to be looking at many of our revenue assumptions and projections. We're not going to update or talk about our expenditures because we didn't make any changes to those categories from the information that we presented to you in December with our rollover budget. And then we'll look at how these changes in revenue affect our overall budget forecast and a summary of that, and then answer any questions that you might have. So our revenues, so one of our large revenues is our property tax levy. So we are estimating that our tax cap calculation is going to be about 2.1%, which would be a compliant tax cap, which is an increase of about $831,000. That includes the tax base growth factor and CPI at 2%. What changed here from our last presentation is that we received our information from BOCES regarding the capital exclusion that we're allowed to include in our cap. It was a decrease of about $66,000, and that's because we paid off our last payment for the BOCES capital project. So we'll be paying a little bit less and receiving less aid back. So there was a decrease in that exclusion. But then additionally, we had an increase in our exclusion of about $6,000. And that's because this year, for the first time in a decade, the ERS rate went up by more than 2%. So anytime ERS or TRS rates increase by more than 2%, anything above that, we're allowed to include as an exclusion in the compliant tax cap. So in order to calculate that exclusion, you take next year's projected ERS salaries and multiply that by the percentage that's above 2%. So our projected ERS salaries right now are about 6.3 million. So it's just over $6,000 that we were able to add. The reason that is still estimated is because as we work through the expenditure estimates, we may or may not update our ERS salaries for next year. And as we do that, that may or may not change that exclusion. State aid, our largest source of revenue. We did receive the governor's budget, which increased our state aid by just over $1 million, 3.7%. That is not fully funded for our projected foundation aid because there was one factor of the calculation that was changed. Typically, inflation rate would be included as part of that calculation at 4.2%, and this year she chose to take an average of the last several years and lower that to 2.4%. So for us, that was a decrease of about $240,000 that we would not receive in state aid if we were fully funded.
Yeah, and this is a topic that I think is going to be interesting to watch because although we're not in this situation, if you're looking at statewide, a lot of school districts are concerned about the governor's proposal because there was no save harmless included into the governor's proposal. So essentially, she's running the foundation aid formula, and if it's coming up with a negative number for a school district, she let that negative number roll. Where in the past, if somebody's foundation aid calculation came out as a negative number, they would say, okay, at minimum, they'll get a 3% increase, and they call that the save harmless. So there's two real big things that I'm hearing a lot about in the advocacy world, and that is the inflation factor that Mrs. Bazinski mentioned. The formula calculates to have, I think you said 4.1 or 4.4% as the inflation factor, and she applied a lower one, which is hurting districts like us and bringing us to less than full funding. And then the second component really that I think isn't hurting us right now, but it's certainly a concern for us to watch because at some point it could affect us, is that there's been no save harmless applied. So there are districts that are actually looking at big reductions in state aid at the same time that our stimulus money is also coming to an end from those packages we got from the federal government. So there are a number of districts that are in much worse shape than us, but it's certainly something for us to keep an eye on because you never know what the future holds.
I think the number's 336.
School districts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was close to 50%. And some of the numbers, when I looked through the spreadsheet, are high, like a 43% reduction, big numbers. So we want to keep an eye on that, and we'll certainly be talking to our legislators in this month regarding that.
Miscellaneous revenues. We are projecting an increase of about 11%. We had already talked about increasing sales tax revenue and Medicaid based on estimates of this current year and last year. But we did increase our interest earnings, $167,000. That takes an estimate average interest earning of about 4%. Right now we're earning just over 5%, it's about 5.2%. But we didn't want to go all the way up to that because we don't know, this budget's going to go for another 18 months. We don't know what those rates are going to look like during that time. So we were a little bit conservative and lowered that percentage a point or a point and a quarter, but didn't want to keep it, originally, before it was at like 250-ish. This brings it up above 400,000, just to try to be as accurate as possible without overstating it so much that we're facing a revenue shortfall next year. And for tuition and health services, we had estimated an increase, but the special ed department does an actual calculation for us based on current enrollment. So we were able to increase that revenue another $163,000. And then we left our transfers the same. which include half of our debt service, small amounts of reserves, and the $1 million in fund balance that we have allocated annually. So overall, we're seeing about a 2.1% increase in our tax cap. The state aid and building aid, overall, it's a 3.74 increase. There is about a $400,000 decrease in building aid, but that was anticipated, we knew that was coming. And we have a corresponding decrease on our expenditure side because we have lower payments for next year on the debt. We increased interest and earnings and other revenues, which brought us up to miscellaneous revenues at 11%, and overall gives us an estimated revenue budget of $78,244,000. It's an overall increase of 3.58% in revenue. The next 2 years we have some changes. We did keep state aid at a 0% increase in year 2 and 3, but because we have a good projection on our building aid, we do show those decreases because those are based on the debt that we already have on the books. So that's why we're showing a decrease in state aid next year of 3.4%, because we're gonna have another drop in building aid. And then the following year it's at 0% because we just kept it flat, not knowing what may happen. And then for our property tax levy, we try to keep that consistent around 2%, and the calculations work out so that it is fairly consistent over the next 2 years. So for our expenditure assumptions, we left those alone, which is why it's all still in black and there's no blue. Our expenditure budget from our program continuation budget was $78.65 million, which is a 4% increase in spending. So overall, with our new revenues, we have a gap now of about $400,000. As you can see in the following years, without state aid increases, those gaps continue to grow. So we are reliant on our state aid, and that is just with the goal of keeping our tax levy consistent with smaller 2% increases. We have even more reliance on that revenue from state aid. So overall, $2.7 million increase in revenues, 3.6%, keeping our tax cap compliant. Sales tax, interest earnings, Medicaid, we tried to estimate conservatively but as accurately as possible without risking revenue shortfalls in the next year. Our expenditures didn't change yet. We will update that for you in the March budget presentation, and it leaves us with a $400,000 gap. So how do we close that gap? So our next steps are going over the expenditures. The administrative team has been meeting over the last 6 to 8 weeks. We've had multiple meetings with every department, every building, looking at the services that our department heads feel that they need for their buildings or their departments, what programs that we may need or what updates might be needed. We have meetings scheduled or have already had them with our large vendors, transportation, projections on utilities, health insurance, looking at special ed projections based on current enrollment and possible program changes for our existing kiddos for next year. Move-ins are unknown, so we do try to incorporate a couple slots in different areas for kids that might move in. And then our BOCES estimated budget. We did have our BOCES participation meeting, so there's like 15 of us maybe that get together, talk about what our needs are for next year, and then we go through and compute that, and hopefully it's within our estimated BOCES budget, but we'll be able to update that in March as well. We will monitor the legislative budget for any updates, hopefully in April. We have heard rumors that we would not have an on-time budget, so at this point we are looking to present a balanced budget using the governor's projections, and then if the legislative budget comes in early, we'll be able to take that into factor, or if it comes in after, our budget will already be balanced.
Yeah, I think the concern in that regard is there's 3 weeks left in the legislative session already planned on the calendar after our budget needs to be adopted. So that's why we're already being cautioned that there may not be an on-time budget from the state.
Based on any expenditure changes, we might have small changes in our tax cap, but it will be very minor. And then we have the ability to consider allocation of different reserves. So we have TRS reserves, ERS reserves, we have our long-range reserve plan, which talks about the funding of those reserves and the usage of them. And the purpose of having those monies is to offset increases and keep our expenditures a little more consistent without peaks and valleys from year to year. So once we go through all of the expenditures and have that presentation for you in March, we'll have a better idea of where we are and where we need to go.
So as far as the overall picture looks, you know, as Mrs. Bazinski said, we haven't really touched the expenditure side of the equation, and we'll continue to refine that. But as you can see on the agenda, there's at least 7 of our teaching colleagues that have put in their letter to resign that will be considered by you in the new business, which we know will generate some opportunity for that $400,000 gap to close due to breakage. And we also have other bargaining units and employees that would be potentially looking to retire as well. So as far as that $400,000 gap is considered, you know, we're confident that that will narrow quite rapidly following new business, in addition to us refining and honing in on our expenditure lines more in depth with our administrative team. The one thing I do want the board to weigh in on tonight, because we have to submit it to the comptroller's office, is everybody okay with us, me submitting to the comptroller's office that at this point in the stage of the game, we are considering a tax cap compliant budget? So it's really a yes or no, are you gonna stay within the tax cap? And as we continue with the process, we can certainly modify that, but they do look for an answer by the end of February, and we don't have another meeting before that is due. So,
Do you want me to pull the board?
yes, please.
Sorry, Ms. Massey?
Yes.
Yes. And yes, myself too.
Great.
So our next update is March 19th, and we will have the expenditure projections updated for you across the board. Are there any other questions? Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Anything else under your report, Mr. Bailey?
No, I mean, I would mention, I guess, since it's fresh on my mind, we had all of our kids back in the high school today following mechanical fire yesterday, and I venture to say that you wouldn't even have known anything happened. And that's thanks to some quick acting staff, our emergency responders who responded to help us, as well as our facilities staff who worked all night long to make sure that the building was prepared for school to take place today. I would mention Mrs. Bazinski and her role as overseeing transportation and acting very quickly yesterday to get all of the buses diverted over to the middle school. You know, emergency situations we often plan and prepare for. And I'm thankful we have well-articulated plans, but when they happen at inopportune times, like when 1,000 people are ascending upon the building at the same time the emergency occurs, it makes them a little bit more complicated. And I'm thankful that all of our staff was there to lend a hand, and our emergency responders were there to guide us and give us good advice about the occupancy of the building yesterday, and that our plans were enacted and that they went very smoothly and everybody was safe and secure. And so I've participated, I've been a public school administrator for 19 years, and I've participated in a lot of drills and a lot of emergency situations, but an actual fire was one I've never dealt with. So we do, I think, 10 to 12 fire drills a year in every building, but actually having a fire was a new one for me, and I'm thankful that all those drills and all the protocols we have in place worked as they were supposed to. And I know Mr. Vivolo was there as a member of the Snyder Fire Department, and I'm thankful for his response as well as all of our emergency responders. So that's it.
Yes, thank you. And with that, we will need a motion for new business items.
I'll make a motion for new business items E1A through DD, 2A through E, 3, B, C, D, G, and H.
Yep, do I have a second? Okay. All those in favor of approving new business items E1A through DD, E2A through E, and E3B, C, D, G, and H, please say aye.
Aye.
4-0. All opposed? Ms. Custodi, are there any follow-up items? Okay. Well, then we will need a motion to convene to executive session.
I'll make a motion to convene the executive session regarding employment of a particular person.
Second? Second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries 4-0. Thank you for coming.